Well, hello there. This is Vitchasa Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. I've recently played this game in an inter-club tournament match. So I was playing for Team Sydney, my opponent, another Aussie playing for Team Melbourne. And in this game, I got a very, very lovely Vienna Gambit win. I'm really proud of this game. But importantly, it shows a particular opening dynamic that you as a potential Vienna game player might want to use for yourself. Let's go take a look. Now, I had the white pieces, e4, and black played a somewhat uncommon opening, which is the Nimzowitsch Defense, Queen, Knight to c6. Now, quick thing about Nimzowitsch. Nimzowitsch was one of the fathers of hypermodernism, so this is a hypermodern type opening. The idea is you don't control the center with your pawns initially, trying to develop your pieces on the flank, undermining your opponent's control of the center. So that's a hypermodern, kind of annoying. And the interesting story about Nimzowitsch himself, so Aaron Nimzowitsch, is that he was quite a character. Sounds like he was very annoying to his contemporaries. In fact, Tartakawa, who was one of his colleagues, also one of the fathers of hypermodernism, once quipped that Nimzowitsch pretends to be crazy to drive us all crazy. And there was another chess player, very good player, Marozzi, once had an argument with Nimzowitsch of such intensity in a tournament in Slovenia that the normally, calm and phlegmatic Marozzi challenged Nimzowitsch to a duel with pistols. Put into context some of the modern sort of, arguments between chess players like, Carlsen and Niemann seems a bit tame, doesn't it? Now let's have a look. So what do we do here? The most common move for white, and probably the best moves for white, is d4. And, if you're allowed to take control of the full center with pawns, you should do so. d4 is good. Or potentially the king's knight to f3. They're both fine. However, black played the Nimzowitsch. So they're probably going to be very familiar with the usual ways you would respond against it. I'm not familiar with the Nimzowitsch. I don't want to play into the Nimzowitsch. And so what I usually prefer is also the Queen's Knight to c3. And here you can see potentially a Vienna. So if they play e5, it would be the Max Lang defense. And that's basically what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to steer the game into a Vienna. Here, black doesn't want to commit a center pawn. They develop their other knight. Again, the best moves for white is probably d4 or potentially knight to f3. But I now here play a very sneaky, tricky move. I thought that black was probably not going to be familiar with the Vienna. Firstly, they're not playing e4, e5. And so they're probably just not going to face it very often. And so they may not be aware of some of the tricks. f4. So almost like a Vienna Gambit. And here, I think what black is thinking, and that's what I'm trying to bait them into thinking, is that the next move is that I'm going to potentially play e5 with a potential attack on their knight. And so, how do you avoid that? Well, I need to take the e5 square myself. So here, according to Lee Chess Community Database, the single most common response by black is e5. They play e5. And those of you who are familiar with the Vienna Gambit might recognize this position. This is equivalent to the Vienna Gambit declined with knight c6. So e4, e5, king's pawn opening, Vienna game with knight to c3, and if they played knight f6, that's the Forkby variation, f4, Vienna Gambit, and now decline the Gambit with knight c6. And those of you who are Vienna fans will know that this is a mistake. And in fact, people who just play e4, e5 and allow the Vienna will often know by the intermediate level that this is not the correct way to responding to the Vienna Gambit. But because we transposed into this, black may not have conceptualized that this was the Vienna Gambit, played e5. It's a mistake because after captures, we now have d4, attack on the knight, and we chase their knights with our center pawns. Knight back, e5, excellent move, attacking the knight. That knight has no places he can go on the board because every square is covered, forced to undevelop back to g8. And at the end of move 6, beginning of move 7, we've now gained a massive advantage in development, still control the full center with our pawns, and their attempt at a hypermodern doesn't work. So really, really good. And in this position, even though my opponent is rated quite a bit above me in ELO, so about 400 points in the daily format, I had a very strong sense that I had a really good winning chance, that I felt that they were simply not familiar with the Vienna, which basically meant that I could play a somewhat more aggressive, maybe even speculative moves. All right, d6, that's fine. Bishop to c4, and basically immediately targeting the f7 pawn. Notice the fully open f-file, very, very common tactic in the Vienna Gambit. And now they tried to pin. Okay, and here, you know, potentially you might think, oh, I can unpin with bishop captures, king comes here, and then potentially with another check with a discovered attack. This actually doesn't work because if you did that, the queen can still take the knight in that position, even though it's defended, because their bishop now has an attack on our queen as well. And at the end of the day, effectively, we just end up trading queens, but Black ends up on material because I traded a bishop for a pawn. However, I did this anyway. Queen captures with check. Now the best move here is the short castle first. However, what's the logic here? Well, by doing this, it stops Black from being able to play d5. So basically losing the opportunity here. This, of course, drags the king onto the f-file, the fully open f-file. And this doesn't technically work. I'm still okay, but doesn't technically work because I'm one step too slow. But what that actually means is that if Black doesn't play very accurately, I gain that one step and then I have an absolutely massive attack. Let's see what happens. Now, I would want to potentially play check, but here I give short castles first so that there will be a double check. Now, here Black should move their king back to e8. However, I don't think they were familiar with this tactic. They probably thought that this was fine, this unpinning, potential unpinning tactic, because they still have an attack on my queen. And so they opted to develop their knight first, probably thinking, oh, look, that makes sense. Potentially, you know, giving the king an escape square on either direction. It's a blunder. It's a massive blunder. Can you see why? That's right. Knight now leaps forward to g5, double check, unpinning the knight. Here, because of that knight, they don't even have an attack on the knight with their queen. King now comes here. Possibly e8 was better, because after queen captures the bishop, queen to e6 is practically checkmate. In fact, it's almost checkmate in every single line. So what would that look like? Well, let's say they play, I don't know, let's say they decide, oh, I need to defend that square with my queen. And now we still have check, must block, mate. So that doesn't work. If they, oops, let's move it back. Let's say they play that. Well, that doesn't work either. That is mate because it's check or escape squares defended. And so here, what Black has to do is that they have to defend against the e6 square. Now they could, you know, maybe play the knight here to defend, but obviously they just straight up lose their knight. That's the second best move. The only good move, considering that Black is basically completely in a losing position, is they have to play queen to c8, offering a trade of queens, also defending the e6 square. Now, Stockfish here reckons that rook captures the bishop is best. However, after king captures here, it's kind of tricky. There's a whole series of tricky knight moves you have to make. Like as I was playing this game, I couldn't see a checkmate line. Actually, there isn't one. And so that looked like it was just too complex for me. So eventually I decided to play the much more straightforward queen to e2. You can see Stockfish reckons that was better. And here the idea is, okay, so I can't bring my queen here for a mating attack, but I'm going to bring the queen to the same light square diagonal to c4, again with that mating attack. So that's the idea there. Now, black decides to defend that square with knight to the edge of the board. However, I can dislodge that knight. b4. Knight is basically pinned to that square unless I want to be mated. So here they give a counterattack on my knight. I calculated, I thought that was potentially fine actually. I'm just too strong here. It doesn't matter for me to lose that knight. So captures, queen to c4 with check. And you know, they only have one move unless they want to lose their queen. So king has to now go to h6. Here, let's develop, also connect the rooks, captures. They now decide to move their knight. I think maybe they were thinking of some sort of attack here. Rook lift, potentially with a very, very powerful move there. In fact, that's practically mate. So they have to move their knight out of the way. Fine, captures, and now rook anyway with a skewer. And in this position, my opponent opted to resign. Because here, black has only 2 legal moves. King can't escape. They can't block that check. So the only thing they can do is either to trade their queen for my rook. That is actually their best move. Or they could move the king to the g6 square and straight up hang and lose their rook cleanly. This position at high depth, Stockfish here can't see it. It's a mate in 18 moves, obviously very difficult to see, but it looks absolutely dreadful for black. Emotional damage, good game, GG. The big takeaway from this game is to see whether you can transpose an unfamiliar opening to one where you are familiar. So tactically moving from where your opponent has the knowledge advantage to one where you have one. I hope you enjoyed this video and thanks for watching.